In this video, we're going to talk about genetic equilibrium versus evolution. And we've been talking about how populations can change over time due to natural selection. And so through natural selection, if there is variation within a population, and if there's an abundance of individuals, if there's lots of individuals, and if there's competition, these factors can lead to a population changing over time. And so biological evolution is simply the observance of a population's frequency of alleles, or how often particular types of a trait actually change, if they are actually changing. That is biological evolution, and that is driven by natural selection. But how do we know that that is happening, and what if those situations are not happening? And that's what we're going to take a look at in this video, to see what would be necessary for genetic equilibrium, or the maintaining of allele frequencies in a population to remain the same. So the first thing that we want to do is define basically what makes up a population's genes. And we call this a gene pool. And this is the entire collection of genes within a population. So this is all of the individuals, their genotypes within that particular population. So it's basically taking the genotype of all the members of a population, maybe of your extended family, of your classroom, of the school, etc., and putting that all into one kind of big pool that we can look at. The allele frequency is then the percentage of a particular type of an allele within a population. So previously in our genetics unit, we've talked about how a good example of a trait might be eye color. We're looking at a specific type. Here in our image, we were looking at the eye color of, looks like some fruit flies, some flies. Now, the allele frequency is particular to that particular type of trait. So, for example, if our trait is eye color, whether it be in humans or in flies here, the allele could be, in humans, could be blue eyes or brown eyes or green eyes. In our case with the flies here, we've got black or white eyes. And so the allele frequency is how often these different types of the trait actually occur in the population. Genetic equilibrium within a population occurs if the allele frequencies in the population remain the same. So within our whole gene pool, if all of the alleles, the amounts or the frequency, how often they occur, if those are remaining the same, then in the population is said to be in genetic equilibrium. Equilibrium meaning balanced. And so if the allele frequencies don't change, the population is not going to evolve. And we actually have an equation for this. It's p squared plus 2pq plus q squared equals 1. And for our purposes at this level, you don't really have to know too much about this equation. The equation is actually called the Hardy-Weinberg equation. But for our purposes at this level, we're just going to kind of introduce this idea of genetic equilibrium. Now, in order for this to occur, in order for Hardy-Weinberg to occur, or for there actually to be genetic equilibrium and for the population to not be changing, there's 5 things that need to happen. 1, there needs to be large populations. 2, random mating. 3, no gene flow. 4, no mutations. And 5, no natural selection. And I'll talk through and explain these in a little bit more detail here. For large populations, there needs to be a large number of individuals within a population. It's pretty easy and pretty straightforward. And the reason for that is because a couple of different things could really affect the overall population. For example, something called genetic drift. And genetic drift can cause a change in allele frequencies in small populations. For example, let's say that we have a population of beetles, and we have some different color alleles, the color of the body, we're looking at that particular trait. And there's some different alleles in that population, and something occurs maybe where there's a random event that removes some alleles from the population. This will be called genetic drift, and somebody comes along and steps on some of these beetles, and it happens to be mostly the green beetles. And so this event, this random event, is going to remove those green alleles from the population. And so if the population is really small, this is going to have really big consequences on the population, because basically all of those green alleles are going to be eliminated or removed. Whereas if the population is large, this random chance event like genetic drift may not have such a large overall impact on the population. Additionally, large population size helps to maintain genetic equilibrium, helps to keep the population a little bit more genetically balanced. Random mating is pretty straightforward, and basically this is the idea that members of the population have an equal opportunity to produce offspring. That individuals select their mates randomly rather than based off of different characteristics. And if we look at this in natural populations, however, mating is usually not random, and we'll kind of get to this and kind of sum this up towards the end. But usually, individuals in a population, they exhibit some sort of sexual selection where they're picking their mates based off of some physical or specific characteristics. You think about humans, for example. Humans definitely pick their mates based off of a variety of different characteristics, and so mating necessarily isn't always random, and we'll talk about at the end what this leads to. Our third one is no gene flow. And what we mean by gene flow is essentially migration. Individuals who join a population basically introduce new alleles into that gene pool, or can introduce new alleles into that gene pool. So for another example with some beetles here, if we've got green beetles population and kind of a brown allele population of beetles, and one of these brown ones migrates or takes its gene to this different pool, it's going to be introducing new alleles to this second population here. Obviously, individuals who leave remove alleles from a population. And so for no gene flow, individuals can't move in or out of the population. They have to be kind of an isolated pocket where there's not new alleles coming in or out of that population. Additionally, there cannot be any mutations, so no mutations. If mutations occur, that's essentially can be introducing, not always, but it can be introducing new alleles, which can overall change the allele frequency. So here, if we've got two green beetles that are reproducing and they have some offspring, maybe a mutation occurs where it's going to result in some different color, a brown color here. So that would be an example of mutation. Kind of goes along with gene flow in that it can introduce new alleles to the population. And lastly, there cannot be any natural selection. So basically, all the genotypes in the population have to have an equal opportunity of surviving and reproducing. If any phenotype, if any particular type of a trait has a selective advantage, if they're going to be more fit or be able to survive more often in the population, then natural selection would be occurring. And so for genetic equilibrium to be maintained, natural selection cannot be happening. Well, you're probably thinking by this point, pretty much all of these that we've just talked about, these 5 that we've just talked about, they happen. There's not always large populations. There's definitely non-random mating. Individuals pick their mates based off of some particular characteristics for that species. There usually is natural selection within a population. There can be mutations. All of these are generally happening. So what does this really mean if we boil this all down together? Basically what this suggests, or what this tells us, is that if any one of these reasons of Hardy-Weinberg, if any one of these 5 conditions that we've just looked at is occurring, then the population is undergoing natural selection and the population is evolving. And pretty much always one of these conditions is going to be happening or not happening, for example. And so that's going to result in that population changing over time. Now, environmental changes can help to speed up this process and can change this process even more of populations evolving. But these 5 conditions, if they were to happen in any situation, then that population would be maintaining genetic equilibrium. But because generally populations are always experiencing at least one of these conditions, populations are evolving. And that's the whole purpose of looking at this, is to be able to identify how that population is evolving, or maybe why that population is evolving. The big key thing from this, and the most important thing from this video and basically from this whole unit, is to remember that populations evolve. It's not an individual that evolves. As much as maybe I want to be able to grow wings and be able to fly, I cannot physically do that. I can't think, or any other organism cannot just sit there and think, I need this sort of traits, I'm going to change so that I can do this. Through natural selection, because individuals who are best fit for the environment survive and are able to reproduce more often than those individuals who are not. Because they pass on their traits to future generations, over many generations we can see favorable traits become more common in the population, and thus populations are evolving, not individuals. We'll continue to talk about natural selection and get some more examples as we progress through the units. This is looking at genetic equilibrium and the balance of alleles within a population.